So finally, the case against Ghislaine Maxwell is coming to a close. It has taken forever, but the jury is deliberating right now, so we're going to find out if she's guilty or innocent. And so I guess technically we don't know. Either she is a monstrous woman that parlayed her role as Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend and then assistant into becoming his sexual recruiter that focused on underage women, or she's the world's most naive assistant or scheduler that had no idea about her boss's sexually deviant behavior. But for the purposes of this video, let's assume that we're going to believe the witnesses that came forward. Let's assume that she followed a well-established playbook where she specifically picked out and preyed upon girls that grew up in impoverished households that didn't have a lot of stability. And Ghislaine leveraged her experience, her education, her money to woo these young girls. She showered them with gifts, showered them with praise, normalized sexual behavior, normalized Epstein's behavior, undressed in front of them, watched them with Epstein, and then even engaged in the abuse with Epstein. Let's assume that that's all true. The question becomes, how does this happen? How does someone like Ghislaine engage in this kind of disgusting behavior? Here's why it's confusing. It is exceptionally uncommon for women to sexually abuse children. It almost never happens. And when they do, the abusers typically have the same kind of characteristics. They're impoverished, very low education, they were abused themselves, they have pervasive mental illness like schizophrenia or very severe bipolar or intense depression. Typically, they only abuse one person, and that person is usually someone in their family, and most often they're doing it in conjunction with or in support of a man. So clearly, Ghislaine meets that last criteria, but the rest of them don't really seem to fit. But the more I try and get myself in her mind and understand how she could get herself in this place, the more I think that there are characteristics that do fit for her. So for example, think about the education piece and the socioeconomic status piece. I don't think it really matters what someone's bank account looks like or where someone went to school. The reason why education and SES are important is because of the desperation that can be created by not having money or not having education. With an empty bank account and with no education, people can feel powerless. It's difficult to gain traction. It's the sense of urgency. It's the lack of traction. That's what creates the distress that can lead to all kinds of deviant behaviors. And if you look at Ghislaine, certainly she grew up in a very wealthy household and she went to good schools. But I think that if you look at the arc of her life, she had all this money. Her dad was in parliament. He had a very successful publishing company. And then when he died, his business imploded. He was an unscrupulous businessman, and he went bankrupt the business went bankrupt almost immediately. And Ghislaine lost nearly everything. And so I think in her mind, the desperation set in. And while she had a good education, she had, at that point in her life, I think she was 29, she had not really worked in the real world. So just like someone who has no education, I think Ghislaine felt like she couldn't gain any traction. She had no actionable skills. The only skill she had, the only thing that she had focused on was her social life. And that's what she leveraged when she met Epstein. And the next component that may fit is the mental health piece. There's not been a lot written about Ghislaine's global psychological wellness, but I can tell you she had a very odd childhood. She grew up in a household with 9 kids, and when she was born, like 2 weeks after, her older brother, who was I think 15 at the time, got in a horrific car accident and then ended up in a coma for the next 6 or 7 years, and then he eventually died. So you can imagine how little attention and focus Ghislaine got when she was young. In fact, Ghislaine's mom has said that Ghislaine had anorexia as a toddler, which I've never heard of a toddler getting anorexia, but you can imagine the level of distress and anxiety she must have been experiencing to try and assert that kind of control over her own body. But then after her brother died, Ghislaine became the apple of her father's eye. All of a sudden, she got a lot of attention. She became his favorite all the way up until he passed away. So if you step back and look at her life, she was probably very sort of unstable and insecure in those formative years. And then all of a sudden, a man gives her all the attention in the world and also all the money in the world, and then dies, and she loses both the attention of a man and all of those financial resources. Which brings us to the last component that fits, which is the relationship with a man. most often when women sexually abuse kids, they do so along with a guy, either passively, meaning they set it up, they bring the girls forward, they watch, they normalize it, or actively where they actually engage in this sexual abuse. In Ghislaine's case, she did both. If you ask me how this happened, I don't buy the narrative that because she was wealthy, she got everything she ever wanted, and so her desires became deviant and distorted. What I think happened here, I think this is a woman that has no real sense of self. I think at a very young age, she learned that she couldn't get the attention of her family and other people. She wasn't worth the attention of her family on her own. She had to align herself with her father. She had to earn the attention of her father. And when she did that, she had a sense of security. And I think that when she grew up and her father died, I think she became rudderless again with no sense of self, no skill. And I think she fell right into the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. And I think she probably quickly learned that her path to security, her path to power, her path to status was through him. And so I think she was willing to do whatever it took to get his praise, to get his admiration. So it doesn't mean she's not a monster. I think she's an absolute freaking monster. But I think like every monster, she has a backstory that explains how she got there.